Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tales, Lies, and Dope Ass Ramblings. My name is Daniel. I am here with my buddy Jeff. How are you doing today, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Daniel. Thank you for asking. High energy. I can sense that you might be a little bit nervous. That's okay. That's okay. Yes, we are the TLDR podcast. Yeah, TLDR. Too lazy? Well, we're here to tell you the news. We're here to cover some segments for you, some just, homebrew segments that have something to do with maybe our histories or just general history of gaming or games in the future, past, present, it doesn't matter. All over the place, we're covering it all, and TLDR is the place to be. My name is Jeff, or Jefferson, it doesn't matter, and I've been playing video games my entire life. It's a pretty expansive thing. I'll get into that at a later date. It's not a really big deal. I would say that I've been playing since about the age of 4 or 5. It's hard to really guess from that age, but watching my brother play the NES or the Sega Master System, that kind of thing. It's memories that I remember seeing, but not necessarily playing myself. But it really helped me get really into gaming, and. Yeah, I'm 30 years old now, almost 31, and I have a lot of experience on my side to sort of assist Daniel. Daniel?
Yeah, that's great because, to be honest, I've also been playing video games for most of my life. I absolutely love them. It's kind of what drove me to want to do this podcast here with Jeff because I just love video games. However, I'm pretty pigeonholed in my experience, so I'm going to rely on a guy like Jeff to help round out some of my experience in this genre. I've been playing games since I was probably about 6 years old, playing first on my parents' very first computer. It's an absolutely terrible thing that probably had 16 megabytes of RAM. It was absolutely terrible playing leapfrog learning games. Eventually graduated to the Super Nintendo, from there to the N64 and various different systems from there. At this point, I don't have too many current systems, so most of what I do is on the PC, which I'm absolutely okay with.
So the first segment we're covering is a news segment. It'll be covered every single week, and who knows? We might change it up from time to time, but for now it's just a little tiny news segment because I spotted this thing online earlier and I was like, wow, this is actually kind of crazy that this is happening. So let's kick right into it. It's called Devotion, this video game. It's a horror game, and what's really interesting about it is it released in February of this year, so it's not brand new, but when it first came out, it was only out on Steam for 7 days, and for those 7 days, it got overwhelmingly positive reviews. Everyone who played it loved it. I haven't touched it. I haven't even seen a screenshot of it, to be honest with you, because I'm not really a fan of horror games, right? I don't think Daniel is either.
No, God, no.
So what ended up happening with this game is it's a Chinese game. I think it's actually specifically Taiwanese, but it was like a universal release on Steam. And what ended up happening was, for some reason, inside the source material of the game, there was an art asset that was left in the game that made fun of, please forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong, Xi Jinping, who I believe is the paramount leader of China. So it was a parody that was comparing this fellow to Winnie the Pooh, and so all these Chinese players got super offended. It became like an internet meme. It was this huge thing, but the Chinese got super offended. So as a reaction, they took the game down from Steam, and that's why it was only up for 7 days. And so it's really actually kind of unheard of for a game that has such a popular reception to just get shut down right away. And it didn't get shut down so much as the developers were like, okay, we gotta pull in the reins and fix this. But what the real question that comes to mind for me is, how did this art asset exist to begin with? Like, it wasn't a stock image. It was something that somebody had, like, intentionally developed and put in the game. So
Yeah.
it's almost as if somebody like tried to sabotage themselves. I think maybe.
I wonder if it was maybe just supposed to be a placeholder. You know what I mean? Like somebody used, like sometimes you'll make a password and it's something really dirty or inappropriate, and you're never expecting to have to tell anybody, but you made it really weird so that you would remember it, and then you call the IT guys because you forgot your password, and then they have to tell it to you, and you're all embarrassed. I wonder if it's kind of something along those lines.
Right, but if it's so offensive that they had to take it down, like why would they even risk the publicity? It's very
Well,
strange.
I mean, it's the internet. Everybody's offended about something.
I guess so. And obviously, some people do see it as a joke, but it was very offensive to a lot of people. And like the characters written on it wasn't just the Winnie the Pooh reference. It was also the art asset was like a talisman, and on the talisman in Chinese was written out, translated as basically "Your mother is a moron."
Oh,
So
you do not insult the Chinese ancestry or lineage.
exactly, and I'm not sure if that's referring to everyone's mother is a moron or this Xi Jinping guy. It might be a lady. I shouldn't actually specify if it's a man or a woman. I'm assuming it's a man because it's China. No offense, China. Oh my gosh, I'm digging myself a hole here.
Don't offend China.
Yeah, they're a powerhouse, man. But
Yeah.
so what ended up happening was they took it down with the intention of just removing the asset and making sure there was no other like horrible Easter eggs lying around in the game. But now, obviously, we're in July and the game hasn't resurfaced, and the developers came out and said, "Yeah, we might not just release this game ever again." So
Oof.
it's, even though I'm not a fan of horror games, it's such a weird move to release a game that everyone loved the second it came out and then get like it's just a strange choice.
It is strange. I wonder if at first it got. So was it kind of an indie game, or what? Did it come out from a big developer?
It was developed and published by Red Candle Games, which I'm not going to lie, I've never heard of them. But it was also developed in the engine Unity, and Unity is used in a lot of indie games, so it quite well
Right.
could be.
So it's very likely. So what I'm thinking might have happened is that the game blew up way faster than they expected, and maybe before putting it back up, they're going to make sure that they have the infrastructure in place to handle that kind of exposure, that kind of traffic. I mean, maybe they need extra servers, maybe they need more. Oh, come on, the people that field phone calls and stuff. I'm being really insensitive right now. Come on.
We're both
Help
digging
me
our
out
own
here.
holes. You didn't help me out of mine.
It's revenge. No, it's like the people behind the scenes that do all of your background work for you.
I don't know what you're referring to. Anyway, I just wanted to cover this story because it just hit today, or not this today, this week, that the game wasn't going to be released again. So, it's just it's a sad day for the fans. And like, when I say it's a sad day, I believe it had like, I think it still has like 30,000 Chinese players who somehow like kept like the game in some sort of respect.
Right.
How they kept it, I have no idea, but they did. But it was completely removed from everyone's libraries on Steam. I don't know what that does for like refunds, but it's kind of a sticky aspect on that front as well.
Huh. Yeah, that sounds not so great.
So following our news segment, we're going to be doing our primary topic, and today that's achievements. Achievements are so integral in everything. All games today have achievements. only the smallest of indie games do not have them, and those are so few and far between. I'm usually surprised when I find one. So, I'm going to be covering the history of games, and Daniel's going to be covering a little bit more about our interpretation of games in the here and now. And let me tell you, the earliest history of games goes back way further than I ever thought it did. I've never done research like this before, so it was actually very interesting. So let's get into it. Daniel, do you have anything before we start?
No, I'm on the edge of my seat, man.
Okay. So, where we take for granted, playing video games that eclipse graphics offered by consoles like the N64 on our little tiny cell phones, I want to take us back to the grand beginnings of video games for just a second before I launch into achievements. It's
important. Are we talking Atari?
Oh, no. Way before that. So, it's important to note that most of us born before 1990, I'll say, just as a safe number, clearly remember a time when arcade cabinets existed somewhere, where they were either in like an arcade store just filled with arcade machines, or like movie theaters sometimes had arcade machines in them. And earlier still, like arcades were just super huge in the 70s and the 80s. And I mean, I was born in 88, so I sort of caught the tail end of it, but I do remember playing arcade machines growing up. How about you?
Yeah, I remember all the movies with all the cool kids that used to hang out in the arcades. I mean, I'm from a pretty small town, so I'd only really get to play on the arcades if I'd go to the capital city, Edmonton, because they never really existed anywhere else.
So, yeah, and I'm thinking one of the towns that I grew up in had one arcade machine in one of the candy stores. Like, it wasn't a very popular thing in the 90s. Even the late night or the early 90s, I don't remember it being really a big thing. But
right
back in the 70s and 80s, they were literally the biggest thing on the planet as far as entertainment went, especially for the younger kids, teenagers and such. And what's interesting about arcades, if you're young enough that you don't remember, is that each one only had one game in them usually. And most of the games supported by these things were hulking consoles, if you can call them that. They're giant TVs set into this fancy box. And they...
With generally only like two buttons and a joystick.
That's right. I was going to get into that as well. But what's really fascinating about these games, these titles, is when you saw the arcade machine, you always thought to yourself, that thing must be filled with machinery. It wasn't. I've seen the inside of an arcade machine. They're very, very hollow. There's not much to them. And these titles were soon, very easily adapted onto home gaming consoles like the SNES and the Sega Genesis and stuff like that. But I want to go a little further before that. Before arcades existed, let's go, in fact, decades earlier. Before cell phones, before home game consoles existed, before owning a computer was just unheard of. Let's fly back to the year 1950. The first year that a game existed, a video game.
You're pulling my leg. 1950?
No, I couldn't believe it. But just
was it like nibbles on one of those giant calculators that took up an entire room?
It did take up an entire room, and it was the most simple game you can think of. So, before I actually reveal this game, let's another really interesting piece for, I think, you and me is that this very first game console was invented in Canada. I think that's a pride thing. That's awesome as a game.
Yeah, Canadian trivia.
Yeah, his name was Joseph Cates. This machine was gigantic. It stood literally 4 meters tall.
Wow.
It didn't have a TV screen. It just had a backlight of light bulbs for its display. And it had varying difficulties, but they couldn't just be switched with a single button press. It was like a complicated thing the creator had to do. But the most interesting part of this whole big machine is that it was solely created to play tic-tac-toe. I think
Really?
it's insane. That is, you think about that now, what the heck? Tic-tac-toe, you can play that with sand. You can play that with, like, chalk. You can do that anywhere, right? Like, why do you need a 4-meter tall machine?
And tons and tons and tons of money to build that.
Exactly. But what's really interesting is, despite the significance of this machine, which they for some reason called Birdie the Brain, it was disassembled like 2 weeks after it was created. It was just a little tourist attraction, and then the creator disassembled it. So I'm not sure why he made that decision, but it was only a year later that a variation would emerge called the Nimrod. Have you ever heard the word Nimrod?
Oh, I have heard it. Never in pleasant connotations, though.
Yeah, exactly. I grew up knowing Nimrod as like a kid's insult on the playground. But unlike
You Nimrod, you stole my frisbee.
Exactly. But unlike the 4-meter menace of Birdie the Brain, Nimrod was even bigger. At a massive 12 feet by 9 feet by 5 feet,
Holy.
the Nimrod played only one game as well, called Nim. And Nim was just like a mathematical game against the computer. Basically, it simulated a variation to games such as like the 21 game, if you ever heard of that, where you subtract a certain amount of items in various quantities in an attempt to not be the player with the last item. If that makes sense.
Huh.
Anyway, it was just
I don't think I've ever played that.
it was just a mathematical game. I think I remember playing it in like elementary school, but it shouldn't require such a giant machine to do. But anyway, that's sort of I found that on Wikipedia, and I was like, I gotta put this in the coverage here because that was amazing. So it would still be some time though before we were introduced to video games with actual scoring systems. I mean, technically we could look at like pinball, but this was never like originally designed as a video game because pinballs existed for like 400 years. Like it used to exist in like what are those called? Like Western cowboy bars. Like it was in those.
Like a saloon?
A saloon. Yes, exactly. So
Really?
yeah. They were very rudimentary back then, obviously, but no, it's very interesting for the history of pinball anyway. But I'm not going to include pinball because it didn't start as a video game. So, in 1974, Taito was a video game company. They had a game called Speed Race. It was an arcade machine that rewarded players with additional playtime based on the score they accumulated while playing. So instead of having to put in more coins to play, if you were good enough, you could just keep playing forever, essentially. Similarly, in 1976, Midway created an arcade game called Seawolf. And Seawolf was actually a pretty innovative game. It had like a built-in periscope that you had to look through, and like triggers on the handles of the periscope, so you could swivel it to like look for enemy ships and then fire torpedoes.
You could swivel, like, could you do 360, or was it just kind of relegated to a 90-degree field, or 180 degrees or something?
I believe it was like 90 degrees.
Still, that's impressive.
Yeah, for 1976, yeah, why not? Of course.
Yeah.
So anyway, surpassing a certain score in this game would also extend playtime to allow for higher scores still. But these high scores didn't really mean anything outside of playing the game yourself in that moment. The second you walked away, the high scores would disappear, the next person would play, and they would try for their own high score to play for as long as possible. And these are like the earliest known mentions of high scores at all. And what's really interesting is this concept of extending game time would alter slightly with the release of a very famous game called Space Invaders. In Space Invaders, instead of playing for time, you survived for as long as humanly possible and attained high scores by evading defeat. In Space Invaders, it was the first game to introduce a save memory of previous high scores. So this basically unveiled the highly competitive nature in young children, because when you walked away from the Space Invaders machine, on the very front, like, main screen, it would just list the high scores of people, right?
Yeah, and all of a sudden, you as the nerd that couldn't play baseball because you were too left feet, all of a sudden you have not a sport, but a event to compete in.
Exactly. It was a big confidence boost, definitely for nerds. Other people too, not just nerds.
We use nerds affectionately because we both self-identify that way.
That's
Or
right.
at least I do.
Now, while some might argue that a high score isn't really an achievement, even I can remember competing with friends on this Metal Slug arcade for the best score. And really, that was the first original purpose of achievements. It was one-upmanship. It was bragging rights. It was your name at the top of the high score list that showed by default when the game wasn't being played. Of course, in these days, only the select elite got to reach the high score list, thereby restricting these quote unquote achievements to those who really practiced at these games. After high scores became popularized, some arcades, console games, and even PC games would introduce these like pre-completed programmed high score lists with like static numbers achieved by no one, like AI high scores to help fuel the fires in our young hearts for playing obviously single player games. Interestingly, high scores persist to this day. Some take the form of like programmed entries in games, such as Civilization or Heroes of Might and Magic, while others continue to hold true as competition between players, such as the Greater Rift systems in Diablo and the Mythic challenges in World of Warcraft.
And even PvP games,
Oh, exactly. Yeah, that's a
right?
really good one.
We've got
Yeah.
esports now that are kind of the pinnacle of that, where they actually pit a bunch of people together in the same game, and then you emerge victorious and win a cup just like you do in a sporting event, right?
Yeah, and even non-professionally, your rank is determined by a number.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even qualifying for these things, right? You're determined by a number, how well you did in this past season, right?
Yeah. But at what point did high scores, phase more out of importance and achievements take the center stage? And I feel like the line is very blurred because while I've been talking about high scores up until now, achievements have actually existed for more than 30 years, nearly 40 years in fact.
In like their current iteration.
No, 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 not in their
Oh.
current iteration, just in general, I would say. Here's an example. In 1982, that's the earliest known date of achievements being properly implemented. I wonder, how can you initiate such a system like achievements without the advantage of the internet to spread your high score fame? Activision was the answer at the time. Yeah, Activision existed back then. Why not? Kids who beat one of their games were encouraged to take a picture of themselves standing beside the arcade with their new best score, and then send it to Activision, who would then send one of those patches like Boy Scouts back to the kids to sew onto their clothes.
Really?
Yeah, that's amazing. I
Huh.
mean,
That is super cool.
Boy Scouts aren't really super popular anymore, but like I remember kids getting like camping badges and first aid and swimming and all these things, right? So, when we try to think of modern achievements, we think of perhaps, World of Warcraft, Final Fantasy XIV, other MMOs that have just thousands of achievements to attain. In truth, WoW didn't receive its achievement system until the very end of its first expansion in 2008. However, this wasn't really far off from the beginning of modern achievements. In 2007, Valve was the first true contender of what we call modern day achievements, introducing a set of a set of achievements for nearly every game on its platform, continuing that trend right up to this very day. Not much later, in 2008, I believe, Sony introduced trophies for various medal grades to denote the difficulty in acquiring each one. I really like this system because most games will have a platinum trophy that's a mystery, but everyone knows that platinum trophy is for attaining all the other trophies for that game. And a game like World of Warcraft doesn't necessarily say this is a difficult achievement to get, right?
So what about the original Xbox? Did it have excuse me, did it have the pop-up achievements like we have today?
No,
The console will have its own achievements.
The 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 Xbox 360 had its own little like early version. I forget what it's called. It's like maybe it was just called Microsoft Points or Gaming Points or something like that. It didn't really last. Going into Xbox, like in the more towards the ending years of the Xbox 360, they changed the system, the achievement system, to something else. And going forward, that's what they've been using since. And I have to claim ignorance. I'm not really up to speed with how Xbox does things.
Well, I've had the Xbox, the original Xbox, and the Xbox 360, and it seems to me I remember playing Halo and getting like these little pop-up achievements for getting multi-kills or whatever else. But that might be, I really don't remember what year that was in. I would have been in high school though, so it probably would have to be pre-2006, I suppose. But that might be game specific, not Xbox specific.
Right, and like I said, before 2007, before Valve actually took the center stage with its own achievement systems, achievements weren't really widespread. So anyway, most of these achievements were simply congratulations to players for beating the game on a certain difficulty, or even in some cases failing as poorly as possible. Many were hidden achievements that were not displayed until achieved, but where high scores blur into achievements is around this point. The earliest known achievements never offered any reward, besides bragging rights. It was only the most difficult achievements in World of Warcraft, for example, that rewarded in-game usable items that are universally cosmetic, that can never leave the game, and have no real-world value. And I mean, some people sell achievements in World of Warcraft, but that's based on in-world value. You can spend money, real money on it, but it's not going to give you anything in the real world. It is what I mean when I say that.
Right.
Some of these rewards, however, are actually locked behind a time gate. For example, the last raid of an expansion. I'm sorry I keep using World of Warcraft, but it's a really good example. The last raid of an expansion, right before the next expansion comes out, there'll be like a month window where if you beat the last boss on the hardest difficulty, you will unlock a mount or something. But then after that happens, after that month period passes, that mount is locked away forever. Those achievements that you could get in these very specific time windows are gone forever. And I wouldn't really even though they are in fact achievements, I wouldn't classify them as achievements. And that's why WoW has a slightly different system called Feats of Strength. And I think that's actually kind of a different system. But anyway, so while some players do just ignore achievements completely without any interest in attaining any of them, others view achievements as the final gate to ultimately completing a game in its entirety. And I believe it is here that I let Daniel take over.
Yeah, I mean, excuse me. The prestige is really the kind of the motivating factor for me most of the times whenever I go achievement hunting. It's so that other people can see my account and be like, oh man, this guy is so hardcore, he did all these things, even though it probably never happens, but in my internal mythos it does. So I guess I was wanting to just kind of rapid fire 6 or 7 of these kind of psychological reasons why gaming, like it seems Jefferson mentioned earlier that every single gaming company, every single game now is coming out with achievements. And why are they trending this way? Why do we want this? Why do we as gamers want this? Why do game developers want this? And so here goes. Like the first on my list is that they place our expectations of ourselves, our own performance expectations, higher, right? So if we don't know what's possible, if we see get 50,000 points on this particular level, right? If we see that as an achievement, and we've only ever managed to get 35,000 points on that level, we're like, oh well, at least we know it's possible, right? So all of a sudden we've got this thing to strive for. Another thing that it does that having achievements in is it increases our the actual fancy pants psychological term is self-efficacy. What that basically means, to unpack that, is how effective you are with your playtime. I mean, things like high scores, things like fastest times. If you've got things to strive for, you're not just wandering around, kind of lost in a city, just bumming around doing nothing stuff, and essentially getting bored and possibly quitting the game and moving on to something else. If you've got something to strive for, if you've got a carrot, then you keep in the game. You keep earning the developer money.
So what was that term? It was self-efficacy?
Self-efficacy, yeah. I guess that's a pretty fancy pants term I've been seeing in kind of some of the different psychological circles that I was studying. The next thing that it really that it does is it leads to a sense of satisfaction. Satisfaction, achievement, right? The very term achievement sounds like you've achieved something, you've transcended, you've become better than you were, and that itself is kind of the crux behind what they call the gaming addiction. That's been kind of bandied about. That term's been thrown around recently in different circles, and they actually recently, the World Health Organization created a classification of addiction for gaming. It has a definition, it has parameters you can fall inside, and what this essentially is the inability to spend time in the outside world because you're so wrapped up in achieving in your video game world, and that addiction is kind of characterized by having struggle in life. And your game is easier to see results, easier to see progress and advancement. So you want to spend more time in there because of the dopamine that your brain's constantly getting fed for achieving these things. So it's really actually fascinating. I find it's really fascinating.
It's interesting too that you mentioned how people just have this drive to get the achievements done. Because back maybe 5-10 years, I remember a game existed online called Evony. It was Evony. It was just one of those basic games where there was you had this castle, you built farms, mines, etc. You built an army, and then you sent it against other people. And my brother had this game, and he's not a gamer. He found it one day. It was like Farmville kind of thing where he found it and he was like, okay, I'll create an account. And he played it a little bit, and he didn't really put hardcore time into it. I'd say an hour a week max. He really did not play it very much. But what I did find when I watched him play it was he was trying to get achievements. He barely played the game, and he'd still because in Evony at least, when he tried to get achievements, the achievements would reward resources and stuff like that. So the game gave him a reason, an additional reason for trying to get all the achievements done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think of a game like Skyrim, where they had that Hearthfire, I think it was called, that DLC where you were able to build your own house, and you could build this austere kind of stripped down. It's a big house with lots of additions on it, but if you walk inside, there's nothing. If you really wanted to deck it out, if you really wanted to get your creations in there, make it all decorated and looking great, you had to go out and do essentially achievements, do random things out in the world, achieve certain things, hit certain benchmarks that kind of helped this entirely useless thing. It was your home, right? It was player housing. It was actually absolutely pointless.
Yeah,
to
player
the game.
Housing on a single player game, additionally pointless.
Exactly. Entirely pointless, with the exception of having an achievement, right? So you can walk through your digital home looking left and right, and you can see all the things that you've done. You can see all of the achievements that you've gotten, all of the, this armor set is on that mannequin, and this piece of armor or this piece of furniture I had to go out and farm all the materials for so that I could build it. And it was just 2 stories you could have. You could have library over there, you could have a dungeon over there, you could have all these really neat things. And like you said, it's a single player experience. It exists for no reason other than to give you a visual for all of the cool things that you've done. And that's one of the really neat things that it does too. We're kind of moving on my list here, is it creates a sort of commitment to the game. I talked a little bit earlier about the developers wanting you, the player, to be in the game as much as you can, as much as possible, because it means more dollars for them, especially microtransactions and what have you. It means that you're playing their game, you're not playing the competition's game, and you're more likely to keep buying subscription fees, keep buying DLCs, keep buying in-game items for microtransactions, and you're earning them more money. So they want you to get committed to their games. So they create these achievements. They put especially some super hard to achieve ones, and it costs them next to nothing to make a cosmetic item that, you think, hey, that helmet looks really cool, or hey, that car looks great. I want to slap this spoiler on my, this sweet Mazda I've been tricking out. Whatever it is, it's different and it's cool, and you, the player, like to look at it. And so you're going to strive for that thing. You're going to get committed. You're going to set that as a goal, and you're just going to, like I said, spend more time in the game. So it acts as kind of like a guidance mechanic to inform the developer. This is on top of just spending more time in the game. It actually informs the developer on what sorts of things you, the player, are interested in. So they kind of guide them in their future builds. Like if they create a list of, say, 400 achievements, and 100 of them have to do with how your character looks, and 100 of them have to do with high score, and 100 of them has to do with, like I said, that Hearthfire expansion where you're building your house. And they can look at these different metrics, and they can see where people are spending most of their time, and that informs them for the next DLC, the next game, the next content that they release. It informs how they're going to kind of direct that. They're going to spend more time exploring this thing that people really love, so that they can get more people spending more time in this game. I think it's really...
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I've never thought of achievements being utilized that way, because, like, in World of Warcraft, like, there are hosts of achievements that people complain about. Like the pet battle achievements. Everybody I know, except for one or two people, hate it. They think it's a useless system. Why is it there? Why does it reward like mounts and stuff? Because it's such a tedious activity to do. And I wonder if back in Blizzard headquarters they're looking at the statistics and saying, oh, actually, majority of players are doing the pet battles, so we're gonna keep improving on it, kind of thing. That's actually a really good point.
Well, I mean, just in the case of pet battles, just put it on mobile and I'm there. I do not want to spend my in-game time playing pet battles, but you put it on mobile, man, I'll Pokemon the hell out of that, even though I don't really like Pokemon.
Oh, don't start a war.
I know. I'm crossing into dangerous territory here. I got two things left. So the first one is that they provide kind of a proof, a social proof. For example, you can get into a game and you can say, hey, I want to queue up with this group of people that are going to kill this big bad or do this big thing, this raid or whatever. And you'll find that a lot of times they don't want you coming along if you're a newbie. They don't want you coming along if you've never done it before. They only want people in their group that know what they're doing, so they don't actually have to take the time to stop and explain to you. People are very impatient. They got busy lives. They don't want to spend a ton of time, going over and over and over, bashing their head against the same boss or mechanic because you, the noob, don't know what you're doing. So what they'll often ask you to do is they'll ask you to provide a link for this achievement, kind of proving that you've been here before, you've done this before. It's not proof that you're a good player, it's just proof that you've seen this content before and passed it. That's kind of unfortunate because it ends up locking a lot of people out of some really neat content. But that's another way that people are using them.
As a slight tangent to that, they did introduce gear score for the longest time, right? How gear score was just like a score assigned to your gear, and it it worked and worked and worked, and then suddenly, I guess the guys who were developing that mod stopped developing it, and the players suddenly had to rely on something else for quote unquote proof that the player was good. So maybe that's why they started relying on achievements.
Yeah, it's possible. However, I play a game on my cell phone called Hustle Castle. It's kind of similar to Fallout Shelter. It's got a couple of other games that are like it. It's like a city builder where you create this this neat little castle with all these different rooms inside of it, and you end up building this combat team. And what happens is you build this combat team, and it has combat points assigned to each piece of gear, and they work cumulatively. So the sum of all of your pieces of gear, the essential gear score, is kind of mashed together, and that gives you a basic idea of how strong your team is. And then the game pits you against others that are similar in score. To put it, I'm kind of oversimplifying it. They actually have a pretty robust system for pitting opponents against each other. But for sake of keeping it short, I'll just say that they follow score, gear score. But what actually ends up happening is that if you're the kind of person that just wants to progress, and you end up just grabbing all the gear that has the best score on it, you end up with a really weak team. Even though it's like trying to put all of the best NHL players on one team. They're actually going to be terrible, because you need not just the best point scorers, you need, the best playmakers, you need the best, different positions feed off of each other. You need the synergy, right? And so gear score, what would happen a lot of times is they would end up just going by gear score, and it wasn't proof that the person was any good. It was just proof that they'd played enough time, logged enough hours to achieve some of these pieces of gear that essentially they weren't utilizing to their full potential anyway. So,
interesting.
Yeah, the major one for me personally, this is how I use achievements, is that they kind of motivate my social comparisons. So I'll oftentimes, Jeff talked about World of Warcraft. I've played World of Warcraft since I was 14 years old, I think, since 2 months after the game hit the shelves. Like, I've been playing for just about 15 years now.
I'm responsible for that.
He is. I've wasted so many years of my life because of you. So what I will end up doing a lot of times is, if I'm running around the game and I'm kind of bored, I'll end up taking one of my friends. I'll click on one of my friends from my friends list, and I'll just kind of glance at their achievements. And depending on, if it's somebody that doesn't play that much, because I don't get the chance to play that much, so my achievement score is not great anymore. If it's somebody that doesn't play that much, I'll be like, haha, better than this person, more achievement points than they do. And if I pull up Jeff's character, well, I'm just soul crushed, because I don't know how many achievement points you have, but I think you got me beat by several thousand.
I have like 21,000 or something.
Oh my goodness. That's that eclipses me several times over, I think. But it's neat to be able to pull up kind of these achievements that this person has done that I haven't done, as kind of a way to inform me, okay, what parts of the game haven't I done? Haven't I explored? Haven't I, what experiences are there left for me to achieve? Or conversely, here are some achievements, some experiences that I have been able to do that this person hasn't done. And I feel a sense of pride because, I'm doing better than this person, or I've done more than this person, or I have this item that this person doesn't have. As Jeff mentioned before, getting mounts that no longer are available to anyone because, I chose to sacrifice and do this thing at the time when it was current, when it was relevant. And, achievements because of all of these huge things that I've listed. At this point, I think if a game developer puts out a game that doesn't have achievements wrapped up in it somehow, they're really putting themselves at a disadvantage. And not only that, they're making their game, they're giving their game a very narrow, very short shelf life. You know what I mean? The game isn't going to be evergreen. It's not going to be playable over and over, because it just doesn't have all this longevity provided by achievements.
Well, what's really interesting about achievements, like with my history with achievements, is I remember playing. I think World of Warcraft must have been one of the first games I played that had achievements. I mean, I had Steam before World of Warcraft, but at the time I didn't really pay much attention to it. But what ended up happening was I bought the game called Binding of Isaac. Binding of Isaac is like a roguelike. Everyone knows it. It's a very popular title. And basically, the game has. It constantly gets expansions. I'm sorry, I'm searching for it. It constantly gets expansions. So every time an expansion is introduced, they just add more achievements onto it, similar to WoW. But unlike WoW, Binding of Isaac is pretty finite. So even though it has a lot of achievements, it's actually, it's believable for yourself that you can achieve all of them. So right now the game has 400 achievements. And
Okay.
when I stopped playing the game, it had 360 something achievements. And I had unlocked 359. So
Wow.
I was like 4 or 5 achievements away from having everything. And the last achievements that were left were just like do the daily quest for 5 days, do the daily quest for 2 weeks, and then a month, and then 2 months or something like that. It was the same thing in incremental values. And
Right.
at that point I was like, no, I don't like doing the daily. It's boring to me. It's a competition between other players, and for a high score, like we were talking about earlier, and that kind of thing just isn't my game. So, as much as I love playing the game, I don't want to put these weird restrictions on myself in these daily challenges, just to get these final 5 achievements.
Yeah.
So I just said no. And for the longest time, probably for about 4 or 5 months after that, I would log into games like World of Warcraft and look at achievements and say, what's the point? I don't like. And it happened in World of Warcraft similarly. I remember at the end of Cataclysm, I had a lot of free time in Cataclysm. I was unemployed at the time, and so I just went hardcore on achievements, and I got the vast majority of achievements that existed at the time. That's why my account has so many achievements, is because during that time, I played an awful lot. But then when Mists of Pandaria came out, it felt like the amount of achievements doubled in number. And I was like, well, now it's like starting from like step 1. And I was like, what? I know some people are out there who achieve everything. Every time an expansion comes out, they somehow accomplish everything. But, it sort of, at least in the context of these bigger games with lots of achievements, it's almost self-defeating to have so many achievements.
If you're, I agree with you, especially if you're a completionist. Like I just quickly Google searched. There is only one that I'm aware of, person in the entire game of Warcraft that has completed all of the available achievements, and I don't know if this is current to today.
Was that the
but
Death
as
Knight?
of that is a Death Knight named
Yeah.
Xirev, Xirev. And this person managed to complete all of the then available, probably continued doing it, achievements in game, which amounts to just about 30,000 achievement points. Further down the article, it says between 850 and 900 days worth of game time on that one character to complete all of the achievements. That
Which is
absolutely blows my mind.
That's also taking into consideration that the Death Knight wasn't introduced until the second expansion. Like, this isn't
Right.
a vanilla character that has 900 days on it. It's a newer character that's several years later, right?
Right. So in a game like that, I mean, how many millions of people have gone through? They released a visual a little while ago. I don't remember how long ago. A couple of years ago, Blizzard released some sort of an infographic that showed how many different accounts have been created. Now, I know that there's some multi-boxing and stuff like that going on in there, but the number can remain fairly accurate that there was over 100 million different accounts, right? So the fact that one person out of 100 million has managed to achieve this is pretty stinking rare, right? That itself isn't an achievement of its own, but the vast majority of people are not going to be that way. They're not going to do like you said earlier. They're not going to keep bashing their head against this wall of achievements that are just like, oh, it's content that they don't want to do. And that's the beauty of it too, is if you're a big enough game, you can set out these thousands of different achievements that are available, and you can play the game that you want to play, and you can feel rewarded for doing it.
But see, like you said, it's only the few that are going to get all these achievements. But there are very many more than just a few that are perfectionists, that are completionists, that want to do it but can't because of life, right? So, like in World of Warcraft, Binding of Isaac, things like this that just have so much as positive as achievements actually are for us, as much as we complain about them, there are some games where it almost inhibits you from even attempting to get all the achievements, which I think is it's weird, because a lot of the achievements, like you reach level 10 by playing for a couple minutes and boom, achievement, and you're like, oh, I didn't try for that, I was just playing the game. But then other achievements are like, hey, you didn't die and you beat this in 4 minutes or something extreme, and you're like, oh wow, yeah, and you get like a title or something. And it's just weird how the achievements are just so radically different from one another. And not that the game ever asks you to get all the achievements, but it's almost like like you said, it's almost like you're feeling compelled.
Yeah, if you're that kind of person that's the completionist, I don't necessarily feel. I mean, I've felt the tug in some small ways, but I've never. It's never been realistic for me, so I've never really allowed it to kind of take any kind of purchase inside my achievement goals. I look at it as all positive, because like I said earlier, you're able to pick the content that you want to play and just go hard at it and feel rewarded for it. And another thing too, I know we talk about World of Warcraft a lot, but in between, I imagine it's the same for most games. In between your DLCs, your additional content, those achievements are always there. They provide a kind of a background, a backstop for when you've completed the content that's pertains to this particular content drop. When you've completed the story, you've completed the lore, or you've gotten the thing that you're supposed to get, the talisman or what have you, and you're just waiting for the next thing to come out. Achievements are a nice place to kind of settle back in, at least for myself. That's where I tend to go, right? I go back to the achievements because they're neat, they're cool, they're time wasters, and they give me that sense of a goal, right? The time commitment. I'm getting this mount, I'm getting this skin, I'm getting this cosmetic item, I'm getting this title, and it's just, to me, it's a comfortable place to go, like putting on old sneakers or something.
Yeah, and sort of a last comment from me is like a game like Terraria. Okay, so Terraria it was a huge thing when it first came out. I've put nearly 900 hours into the game, and it's so addictive. But because I've played it so long, I'm sick of it. But I only have 8 achievements left. So I don't want to stop playing until I get those 8 achievements. They're not difficult achievements. They're just things that I never do in the game. Like fishing is in the game. I never fish. And there's like 5 of them are fishing achievements. So it's like, well, one day I'll sit down and I'll actually go and do those stupid fishing quests. But until then, I'll never feel like I've actually completed the game. And then after that, I'll feel like I never need to play the game again. I'll have done my part for supporting this game. Even though the developers don't see me playing it, I'm not like, there's no actual physical support. It's just, you feel like you've done your duty.
And then as soon as you get those last achievements, then they're going to release a expansion pack, and you're going to have 1,200 new achievements to get.
No, Terraria's done. We're good. It's okay.
Well, that about covers our big topic of the day, the achievement topic. Thank you, Jeff, for all of that valuable historical insight. Typically, at this point, we would head to the mailbag and field some questions from you, the audience. At this point, though, in our pilot episode, we do not have any emails from you guys. Please feel free, though, to email us at podcasttldr@gmail.com, and we will be happy to answer your gaming-related questions. Stay tuned with how to tweet at the TLDR podcast.
Before we end out the show, just going forward into the future, I just want to make sure that everyone understands we're not going to be a typical gaming show talking about, oh, man, I played 4 hours of Fortnite yesterday and I got so many kills. We're not doing that. We don't really cover mainstream stuff. Neither of us really play that kind of thing. So, like PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, PUBG, rather, or Fortnite, or Dota, League of Legends, that kind of thing. We may have dipped our toes in it from time to time, but we've never actually full-blown gotten into it. So don't feel like we're going to be covering too much of that. I apologize, but that's just the way it is. All right, I think that about does it for us this week. I hope you enjoyed our episode. Next week, we'll be covering platformers as a whole genre. Everyone loves genres. Super Mario Brothers, awesome stuff. Donkey Kong, oh, forget about it. We're going to be covering a lot of fun stuff next week. I hope you look forward to it. This is going to be a weekly podcast, by the way. And, we're going to be changing up the topic every week. So platformers next week, but it won't necessarily be shooters the next week. It'll be something else. We'll see. It's just picking ideas out of a hat here. So thank you very much for watching. Daniel, thank you for co-hosting with me.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jeff. Have a great night.
Goodbye, everyone.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tales, Lies, and Dope Ass Ramblings. My name is Daniel. I am here with Jeff, and we are... No. We are not.
I thought you were going to pause on Jeff so I could say, hello!
Okay, I will. That's what I'll do. Starting over. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Tales, Lies, and Dope Ass Ramblings. My name is Daniel, and I'm here with...
Oh, I thought I could just say hello.
Okay, so I'll say your name, and then you just say hello, and then I'll go into the banter about how are you.
Okay.
Okay? Starting over. Ah, shit.
Language.
I'm sorry.
Write it down.
I am.
Okay, now delete it.
I almost wrote mailman. I don't know why I almost wrote mailman.
Oh, you are really out of it.
I didn't watch enough Markiplier.
Okay.
I gotta stop saying
So you want me to cut this part out?
Yeah, please.
Okay.
Stay tuned for how to tweet at the tit.
The tit?
Maybe alienating a big portion of our viewership right off the bat.
You already said you hate Pokemon.
You're right, I did.
What the
Whoops.
hell?
I disconnected. I hung up instead of muting myself. I don't even know why I felt like I needed to mute
Good
myself.
night, everyone. Click. I'm like, oh my god.
Did it make a sound?
It did, but I'm not sure if you said goodbye after I said goodbye.